Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, August the 22nd, 2023. Today I want to talk about the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. I talked about Klaus Schwab yesterday, so, why not talk about another German? So he has been Chancellor of Germany since, I think, December the 8th, 2021. I haven't looked at his chart before, so now would be a good opportunity. He's lucky, I would have said. I set up his chart. I wanted to say something negative about him, I'll be honest. I wanted to predict doom and gloom because that's what I like doing. But there's a lot to be optimistic about in terms of his overall horoscope. Even though, people are saying that Germany is collapsing, its industry is collapsing, it's being deindustrialized, Scholz is unpopular and so forth. But he's got a really good chart. He's got no water in his chart, though. I found that interesting. And here's a question. Who before Olaf Scholz was the last German Chancellor to have no water in his chart? Yeah, I think you know the answer to that. But anyway, before I talk further about Olaf Scholz, I will look at today's astrology. And today is Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023. So here goes. There, top right, there's Olaf Scholz, looking, I think, quite pleased with himself for some reason. So what's going on today? Well, the moon is now in Scorpio. It's well in the Via Combusta. This part of Scorpio, the moon is pretty much the worst place it can be. Now, I understand some people are born with their moon in early Scorpio, and, they always find a way through. But in general today, with the moon in this position, in the Via Combusta, the flaming path, we have to accept that things can just happen. We weren't planning on them, we weren't expecting it, but it just happens. So if we're making plans, we just have to be careful that we've always got a standby and that we have a certain amount of flexibility. Though I think things are helped by the fact that the moon is making an 120-degree trine aspect to Saturn. Saturn helps sort of stabilize the moon. So maybe we won't have quite as much chaos as we might have expected because of Saturn's, as I said, Saturn's stabilizing role. There are other things going on in this chart. Mars is at late Virgo, 2653 Virgo, and it is opposition Neptune. Now, I think that's not great because, Mars is an energetic planet. It likes to take the initiative. It likes to be assertive. Mars in Virgo wants things to be, very straightforward. Mars in Virgo wants to focus on the details, get everything sorted out. In terms of perhaps looking at figures, numbers, spreadsheets. That's how Mars sometimes might want to function. Virgo is also a very physical sign, so some of us with Mars in Virgo might want to put one's energy into getting fit, working out, that kind of thing. Those people that run around with computers strapped to their arms. Some of them may have Mars in Virgo. But it's that kind of day. Unfortunately, with that opposition to Neptune, there's a bit of chaos in the air. So if we want to assert ourselves and we've got a clear idea about how we're going to do it, we might be disappointed, we might be confused. Our efforts to get things done could be completely disrupted by matters that are completely beyond our control, perhaps. So we mustn't get angry about it if that happens. Also, we mustn't put our energy into the wrong areas. So, Mars in Virgo is actually quite a hypocritical sign. It says one thing, does something else. Mars in Virgo might want everything to be nice and clean and straightforward, and then goes and does something which is completely counter to that. For example, getting involved in stuff which is sleazy. Mars-Neptune, that pair, as I always say, the Mars-Neptune pair is about sleaze. So we must be careful that we don't put our energy into things which are immoral, criminal, dangerous, that kind of thing. Because if we do, well, there's going to be trouble at the best of times. There could be even worse trouble with Mars opposition Neptune. So that is an area where we do have to be careful, or at least some of us have to be careful. Another aspect going on today is a 90-degree aspect between Venus and Jupiter. Now it's a square. It's an unfortunate aspect. It's not a dreadful aspect. It's not quite as bad as the opposition. But there is tension between these two planets. Now, Venus and Jupiter are the two benefics. Jupiter is the greater benefic. Venus is a lesser benefic. So you might think, well, if they're in square aspect, that's good. But any aspect is good. And maybe it is for some of us. It could be quite fortunate. For example, the right relationship may work very well. Venus is the planet of love, square Jupiter. There is a contact there. But it might be a bit indulgent. There might be a certain sense of exaggeration and just not knowing when to stop. Venus is also the planet of money. So if you put the planet of money square Jupiter in Taurus, Jupiter in Taurus kind of likes the good things in life. So there's a danger of over expenditure with Venus square Jupiter. There's also a danger of just too much emotion, getting stuck in a particular way of emotional being and just not knowing when to stop. Don't get too emotional, because once you start getting emotional, it might just get out of control. So that is something to bear in mind. So overall, there are some good things about today, but there are some quite dangerous things. As I said, Moon in a Vir combustor, Mars opposition Neptune, and Venus square Jupiter, which does have to be handled correctly. So be careful. Avoid exaggeration, avoid sleaze, and always have a plan B. Now, as far as my forecasts for the 12 signs are concerned, as usual, I have them here. These are my forecasts for today, which is today being Tuesday, August the 22nd, 2023. Aries. Watch out, Aries. Things are suddenly looking complicated, and you mustn't underestimate the power of other people's feelings. At the same time, Mars, your ruler, is making an opposition aspect to Neptune. You might find yourself putting energy into things which are strange and unusual and even dangerous. Your impulsiveness could make things even worse. Taurus, right now you have a larger-than-life personality and you want to make the most of everything on offer. Yet, with Venus making a square aspect to Jupiter, there's a danger that you take things too far. The exaggeration gets out of hand, and you might end up by embarrassing yourself, or spending too much money, or both. But in love, there are definite opportunities. Gemini. If you spend too much time at home, you could end up destabilizing yourself and your family as well. It is about energy going in the wrong direction and you being seriously distracted. It's better to work out a strict plan and follow it to the letter. This particularly applies to career and business. Cancer. You can ground your talents thanks to a favourable aspect between the Moon, your ruler, and Saturn. So consider your capacity for creativity and see what you can do. But don't take what you are doing too seriously. Yes, concentration is important, but not to the point where you get obsessed about yourself and your genius. Leo. The Sun, your ruler, is moving onto Regulus, the royal star. In isolation, this is good news. It's a time when Leos can link up with important and influential people. Yet your inclination will be to keep yourself to yourself. So if you're not careful, you might miss a valuable opportunity. And of course, the Sun is on the verge of leaving your star sign. Virgo. Mars continues to move through your star sign, where it makes an opposition aspect to Neptune. Relationships of all kinds could be difficult, and certain people could almost bring you to a standstill. So avoid confusing people. By that I mean avoid people who confuse you. And also don't get into arguments unless you really know what you're doing. Libra. Venus, your ruler, makes a 90-degree aspect to Jupiter. You want something to happen and you have a certain capacity for exaggeration. Fair enough, but you don't want to take things too far. If you go over the top, you could cause a lot of damage. And one thing you certainly don't want to exaggerate is expenditure. Scorpio. The Moon is in your star sign, so on an emotional level you seem to know what's going on, but that doesn't mean that you can't get totally confused. After all, Mars, your ruling planet, is making an opposition aspect to Neptune. The moment you try to assert yourself, the targets of your energy start jumping around and even disappearing. Sagittarius. Other people can't be avoided, and whether or not this is a good thing depends on you. Provided you understand the boundaries, then the various relationships you're in could be very rewarding. But if boundaries get compromised, the misunderstandings could pile up. Avoid mindless displays of generosity. Capricorn. Think carefully about your social life. Think carefully about whether you want to get in touch with old friends and new, because some people don't know when to stop and they might decide to unload their problems onto you. Yet, if the circumstances are right, you can be a powerful controlling influence on one particular person. Aquarius. At the moment, there is a lot of chaos flying around, but I don't think that it impacts you personally. So you perhaps have to decide how you want to play it. You can certainly create some order in your own little part of the world, but if you try to sort out major issues which aren't of your making, you might feel overwhelmed. Pisces. It's a day when you can find new meaning. Activities which seemed pointless all of a sudden have a purpose, and as a result, your overall level of satisfaction is likely to increase. But you don't have to explain anything, and you should choose your company carefully. Harmless people can waste a lot of time. Now, before I talk about the I Ching, there's a couple of things I've forgotten. in particular the fixed stars. Now, you may have heard when I talked about Leo that the Sun is on Regulus. Yes, today the Sun is on the royal star Regulus, and Regulus is a really fortunate star usually. It's connected with royalty, important people, influential people. So, as I said, for Leos can potentially connect with influential people. But what I said for Leos really applies to all of us. Now is a time where we can, reach out to important, influential people. And, there's a better chance than average that they'll actually get back to us. So don't be shy, be brave. You never know what might happen. Another thing happening is that Saturn is on a fixed star, the fixed star Fomalhaut. And I believe that Fomalhaut comes from the Arabic Fom al-Ho, and apparently that means the mouth of the fish. And it was one of the Persian royal stars. I think it was a sort of guardian of the south. But with Saturn on Fomalhaut, while Fomalhaut itself is not an unfortunate star, with Saturn on it, that's kind of not so good, and there is a kind of a warning of sort of injuries, mishaps, just things going wrong in general. So be aware of that. And I think that Saturn on Fomalhaut, perhaps just gives us more of the same. I have suggested that today is quite dangerous. There are a lot of things that could go wrong today, and with Saturn on Fomalhaut, the mouth of the fish, we don't want to get sucked up by the chaos, do we? So anyway, let me move on and talk about the I Ching. So as always, I threw 3 coins in the air and I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 26, the taming power of the great. Now, I said that today there is a trine between the moon and Saturn. The moon in Scorpio is trine Saturn in Pisces. And in a way, this is kind of like the taming power of the great. It's about being restrained. Our own impulse to sort of go over the top is being restrained. And that's a good thing. We've got Venus square Jupiter. We need to restrain that impulse. So we need to be disciplined. And in terms of what we're dealing with, the kind of energies we're dealing with around us, there are some wild energies going around us, like with the Mars opposition Neptune. But we have an opportunity to constrain it. Hence, what I said about the taming power of the great. It's like the I Ching kind of talks about animals quite a lot with these moving lines, because we do have 2 moving lines, the third line and the fourth line. The third line is about horses. Horses moving in a particular direction. We're being pulled by these horses. I don't know whether we're in a carriage or a chariot or whatever. And it's kind of quite optimistic, if we can perhaps trust the horse to go in the right direction. Let this wild energy move up to a point. Then the fourth line is about it's about a young bull and what you do with a crazy bull or whatever, and it suggests putting a headboard on it. I don't know quite how that works. I'm certainly not suggesting that's what you do, because you shouldn't put headboards and stuff like that on bulls, because of you've got to respect them. They're animals. you can't be cruel to animals. But anyway, this is what the I Ching is saying. The bull is kind of representative of a sort of a crazy force in our life, and we've got to kind of restrain this force, tying a headboard to its horns or something like that. That's how we deal with it. And yeah, and I think this really does fit with the astrology. Venus square Jupiter, Mars opposition Neptune. There are some crazy forces going on today, but the I Ching is telling us that actually we do have an opportunity to control these forces, and discipline ourselves, and perhaps discipline our immediate environment. Now, this hexagram number 26, it does move. It moves to hexagram number 38, which is opposition. I think in our attempts to control what's going on around us, to bring some discipline in, we're going to get some resistance. I mean, some people do not want to be controlled. There's opposition. So particularly if we're an authority figure, whether we're in a family, at work, I suppose in government, then there's going to be opposition. Our attempts to control things, to make sure things don't get out of hand, there is going to be resistance. And so we just can't expect to be everyone's friend. And so we just have to be, we have to show some discipline. We have to show some restraint, but I think we also have to show some toughness, and perhaps, we have to maybe stand up to people, but not to the point, of course, where we get involved in a fight. We just have to say, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what we need to do to keep control of the situation. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on I Ching. And so what I want to do now is look at the horoscope of Olaf Scholz. So here we go. Olaf Scholz, here is his chart. He was born on June the 14th, 1958, at around 3 p.m. in Osnabrück, Germany. There's some controversy about what time he was born. Some websites will say that time isn't known, but the German Astrology Astrology Society put a statement out saying, I think that he was born around 3 o'clock, because someone had actually asked him, and he thought it was around 3 in the afternoon. We don't know for sure that is the absolute exact time. Some people have said that maybe he was born 10 minutes later. So I'm taking 3 p.m. as his time of birth. Note, June the 14th, that's Donald Trump's birthday. He was born on Donald Trump's 12th birthday. Another thing about his chart, yes, there is no water in Olaf Scholz's horoscope, except for the Neptune in Scorpio. Neptune is a generational planet. It's in a sign for over 10 years. So when you're adding up the elements, you don't really look at Neptune. You look at the 7 traditional planets. So there's not really any water in this chart. And I went back through all the previous German chancellors, to look at how much water they had in their chart. Willy Brandt had Mars in Cancer. Konrad Adenauer had Mars in Pisces and Jupiter in Scorpio. I think Helmut Kohl had Mars in Pisces. Helmut Schmidt had not much water, but he did have Jupiter in Cancer. Now, if you go back, the last German Chancellor to have no traditional planets in water signs was Adolf Hitler. Not that I'm really saying that Olaf Scholz has got any connection with Adolf Hitler. I mean, I think Olaf Scholz doesn't strike me as being a particularly strong or dictatorial leader. So that's kind of, a bit of coincidence there. In fact, Olaf Scholz has got Libra rising. Adolf Hitler had Libra rising. So, again, I'm just pointing that out. It's just a coincidence. But as far as what it means not to have any water in one's chart, in Hitler's case, having no water in his chart meant that he seemed to have an inability to relate closely to other human beings. There was always a certain distance there, and there was a sort of a lack of, I suppose, obvious lack of compassion. He could take decisions. Millions of people died. It didn't seem to bother him. So that was his lack of water. I mean, he did try to compensate when he was young. He would paint in watercolors. He was an artist of sorts. So maybe with a lack of water, that's how Hitler tried to compensate. But when we're talking about Olaf Scholz, it's not as dramatic as that. But if you're a politician and you have a lack of water, particularly a democratic politician, what you have to do is you have to understand what people are feeling. You have to understand the electorate. You have to be plugged into the electorate, because if you're not, you're just going to become increasingly divorced from them. Now, as far as I understand it, Germany is suffering big economic problems. It is indeed deindustrializing to an extent, because with this severance of its main supplier of gas, with Russia, the Americans blowing up Nord Stream 2, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Things are tough in Germany. Now, maybe Olaf Scholz, with having no water, except for Neptune in Scorpio, which doesn't really count, doesn't fully understand it. He doesn't fully get it. He may think that it's enough to say, well, it's a sacrifice worth taking if it's going to mean the Russians aren't going to win in Ukraine. I don't think that's going to work. I believe, as far as I know, that the German people are starting to turn against the war in Ukraine. So if you're a politician, you've got to be in touch with the changing mood of your electorate. And the mood in Germany does seem to be changing. I mean, perhaps even the mood regarding fossil fuels, and perhaps the green agenda isn't as popular as it used to be. So with no water, how are you going to deal with that? It must be very difficult. Now, that doesn't mean to say that Olaf Scholz is a disastrous politician. He strikes me as being quite a lucky politician, if you look at his chart. For a start, he has got Jupiter rising. I mean, Jupiter rising is great. Jupiter is a greater benefic. At 3 o'clock, if he was born at 3 o'clock, the body of Jupiter had just risen above the eastern horizon. It was just risen up there. I know if you look at the chart for 3 o'clock, it looks as if Jupiter is slightly below the horizon, but the actual physical body of Jupiter was actually above the horizon, but only just. And that makes Jupiter really strong. This is a daytime chart. Jupiter is a daytime planet. Jupiter is a masculine planet, and it's in Libra, a masculine sign. That is an incredible Jupiter, even though it's not in its own sign, or it's in its exaltation. It's still a very strong Jupiter. So this makes him lucky. And he perhaps needs to use that Jupiter. I mean, I suppose Jupiter needs to work harder at making people feel good about themselves. I suppose presenting an optimistic message. I don't know how good he is at that. I've no idea. But even if he is no good at it, that Jupiter is really useful. Matters are helped by the fact that his Jupiter is in a mixed reception with Saturn, because Jupiter is in Libra, which is the exaltation of Saturn, and Saturn is in Sagittarius, which is a sign of Jupiter. So the fact that Jupiter and Saturn are in this mixed reception certainly helps Jupiter. And his Jupiter is trine the Sun. He's got Sun trine Jupiter, Sun in Gemini, trine Jupiter in Libra. Again, very strong Sun. The Sun is in the 9th house. In astrology, the Sun joys in the 9th house. It's and of course Sun, masculine planet above the horizon, in a masculine sign, Gemini being a masculine sign. That's really good, and he's certainly, in terms of politics, he's able to present himself very well, and he knows what to do in order to climb the greasy pole up to the top. Of course, Gemini will duck and dive, will change its views, change its policies, whatever it needs to do to get there. As a teenager, as a young socialist, apparently he was very against NATO, but now he is completely embraced NATO. Despite being a socialist, I think he was close to being a Marxist when he was younger, but no, I think he said something like, he knows he's made mistakes in the past, and now he's grown up. I suppose this is what politics does to people, and he is now a fervent, fervently advocates for this war in Ukraine. Not a problem. Maybe he's getting into his Mars. His Mars is in Aries. Look, he's got Mars in the 6th house in Aries. Mars is a planet of war. It's in Aries. And Mars in the 6th house, Mars, according to traditional astrology, Mars joys in the 6th house. So, being Chancellor at a time when there's this war with Ukraine, with war in Ukraine, Mars is, able to express itself, and then he's got a Moon-Venus conjunction in Taurus. Moon is exalted in Taurus. Venus rules Taurus. So again, that's great. I mean, these two planets together in that conjunction, I think that is kind of quite fortunate. In terms of getting elected, it makes him maybe seem solid and reliable and pleasant and trustworthy, and that's how he got to where he was. And it's a nice balance to the Gemini, but it's not just Gemini talking its head off. You've got the Moon-Venus conjunction in Taurus to stabilize things. So in many respects, it's a very fortunate chart. So it's perhaps not surprising that he's become German Chancellor. Uh, there is a very disturbing opposition aspect, though, between the Sun and Saturn. This Sun-Saturn aspect is really close. Sun is at 23 Gemini. Saturn is at 22, 23 Sagittarius. I'm just wondering how that is going to manifest and how it has been manifesting. Saturn can make people very controlling. Yesterday when we talked about Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, I pointed out that he had a Sun-Saturn conjunction, and that in Aries, and that was his, perhaps he wanted to be in control, maybe in terms of the organization, maybe, other people really don't know how to run their life, don't know how to run the world. So let's provide some kind of august body to control them. Wise people can control them, and that's the authority in it. That's perhaps the Sun conjunct Saturn in Aries. With Sun opposition Saturn, perhaps it's a quest for power, regardless, whatever. So if it's necessary to get involved in this war, and if that's what's required, if that's what makes NATO and the Americans happy, then so what? Gemini is not the most principled of the 12 signs. Gemini, can certainly duck and dive, and it can change its policies and rationalize that change. Rationalize that change very easily. From a generational point of view, notice he's got Pluto in Virgo. Pluto at 0 degrees 3 minutes Virgo. So, just as he was born, Pluto had moved from Leo to Virgo. So what does that mean? You could associate Pluto in Virgo with sort of environmental concerns. I know he's not a green politician. He's, his party is the SPD, the Social Democrats. But maybe that's one way of looking at Pluto in Virgo. The environment. Virgo is an Earth sign. People being concerned about the environment. This is perhaps the first, a generation that really does feel or believe that, global warming and all this kind of stuff, that might be one part of it. I understand a lot of people listening to me now are perhaps skeptical about global warming, so I have to be a bit careful what I say there. But maybe that's part of how Pluto in Virgo occurred to him. It might also be connected with Ukraine. Reason being is that Ukraine's sun is at 0 degrees Virgo. In 2 days' time is Ukraine's Independence Day, August the 24th, Sun in Virgo. And so his Pluto is conjunct the Sun, and so the Sun in Ukraine. So maybe it's, there's a special connection between him, being Chancellor, he can own that Pluto because he's a politician. It's not just a generational planet for him. So maybe there's a connection with Ukraine, and maybe Ukraine is somehow helping him to transform his country for better or for worse. But still, it is surprising, how good a chart it actually is. I think at some stage that Sun-Saturn opposition is going to cause problems. And when you see that Saturn opposition Sun and Mercury, you might be thinking, well, when is Saturn gonna mess with that? Because at the moment, as I speak, Saturn is around 5, 3, 4, 5 Pisces. It's in early Pisces, and Saturn is quite a slow-moving planet, and I think that Saturn doesn't actually get to make the square of Saturn and Mercury, not for a couple of years. I think not until actually 2025. Something like, I don't know about late 2024. I think it's even 2025. So Saturn doesn't hit that point for some time. So that kind of may suggest that there's time. He's got time, and I believe the federal elections in Germany, the latest they can be is I think it's October the 26th, 2025. So by October the 26th, 2025, things could be pretty bad, because once Saturn transiting Saturn is making that square. As far as the Pluto is concerned, Saturn is going retrograde, and Saturn, I think, gets its stations in early November. So Saturn will station very close to his Pluto. It will also station very close to Ukraine's Sun, which is at 0 degrees Virgo, very close to the NATO ratification chart, which again is 0 degrees Virgo. So maybe his Pluto is going to start to tie in with that. There's also Joe Biden's North Node is at 0 degrees Virgo. So these things may all start to coalesce beginning of November. That may be, big problems on the Ukraine front there, perhaps. So as far as other ways of looking at this chart, I did look at Olaf Scholz's horoscope from a Vedic perspective. And before I close, I just want to quickly look at his Vedic horoscope. So his Vedic chart, got it somewhere. Okay, there is his. Okay, so here is Vedic. Here is Scholz's Vedic chart. And maybe there are some lessons to learn from this chart. So Vedic astrology divides life up into these 9 periods, as I always say when I look at a Vedic chart. And in December 2014, he entered his Saturn Dasha. Now, you might think, well, Saturn is unfortunate, but in his chart, Saturn rules the 5th house, and that does help Saturn. The 5th house in Vedic astrology is very fortunate, and his Saturn Dasha is a time where he has become Chancellor, so that kind of fits. So can we therefore expect him to just have constant good luck until his Saturn Dasha ends, which isn't until 2033? Well, I suppose that's possible. But in terms of his subdashas, at the end of 2024, December the 12th, 2024, assuming it's 3 p.m., his birth time, he enters his Sun subdasha. Now, remember, in his Western chart, I was talking about the fact that he had a Sun-Saturn opposition, and so he's obviously got a Sun-Saturn opposition also in his Vedic chart, and you can see his Saturn. In his Vedic Saturn is in Scorpio. Obviously, his Western Saturn is in Sagittarius, and its opposition his his Vedic sun, which is in Taurus, because he's a Gemini Western, Taurus, sun in Taurus in the Vedic chart. So that Sun Saturn opposition is potentially difficult, and I'm thinking that it's not the real problem with that Sun Saturn opposition may not manifest until right at the end of 2024, and then as he moves perhaps into an election in 2025, things could really start to fall apart, because that will also be when transiting Saturn is in his Western chart is aspecting his Sun Saturn opposition. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say on Olaf Scholz. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be more interesting. When you look at someone like Olaf Scholz, you're kind of hoping you're going to find something really bad coming up straight away. But no, I'm afraid Olaf Scholz has got a very good chart, and that explains how he got to become German Chancellor. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.